Hi, I'm Angela Fehr. Come paint with me today in my studio as we try out Shinhan professional watercolor paints to paint a beautiful spring afternoon scene just looking out my studio window. As well, stay tuned after the video and I'll tell you how you can win a set of Shinhan professional watercolors, a 30-piece set. Hi everyone, Angela Fehr here. I've had this box of Shinhan professional watercolor tubes. There's 30 tubes in this box. I've had it for a long enough time to fill a palette and get that palette quite dirty actually. I've done a couple of paintings, I've started a couple of review videos, and I realized that I hate reviews and I don't want to do a review. I really think that in order to do a good review of any watercolor product, I need to have a deeper and more technical product knowledge than I really want to invest time in. My focus is always, how can I use this product and how does it work for me? So we're going to, instead of a review today, I'm going to be just painting. I'm going to share a little demonstration for you on painting a lovely and lively spring scene in watercolor. And then following the video, I'm going to be giving you the opportunity to win a set of Shinhan professional watercolor tubes, just like this one, only with tubes that are actually full. So let's get started painting. And tune in, hang around so I can show you how to win. So it is spring here in northern British Columbia right now, one of my favorite times of year. Spring means there's new life and new hope, and I'm going to paint what I see out my window in my personal loose and colorful style. So it's not so much about realism as it is about enjoying color and enjoying watercolor. I like to start with dry paper. This is Arches 140-pound cold press. And I've just torn it straight off of a 9x12 pad. And I'm going to use the Shinhan yellow-green to just get the first layer of color down. At this stage of the painting, creating that first layer, you really want to keep your values light, and it's more about creating placement for all the elements in the scene. Now I've squeezed out just a couple of different blues here, and I found that in the Shinhan set there are only 4 blues, and yet for some reason there are 6 greens, which makes absolutely no sense to me because green you can mix, blue you cannot. So if I was choosing again, I think I would choose a Shinhan set that had a little more blue in it. We're going to use the cerulean hue. Shinhan professional watercolors are actually not their highest grade of watercolor, adding a little ultramarine here. Shinhan premium watercolors actually have the more professional pigments. So when you see a color listing that says hue, you know you're not getting the pure original pigment, thus receiving a more affordable product. The Shinhan paints are all made in Korea, and I find them to be economically very reasonable, and you can get set up with a wide range of colors for a very low investment and have color to last you for years. I kind of feel like I should have put more clouds in my sky, so we're going to test Shinhan's ability to lift here in just a second. I'm going to let that place those sky colors, the ultramarine and the cerulean hue. And then using my paper towel, I'm going to lift out my cloud shapes to see how they lift. And this is a good way to test if a pigment is staining or not. And generally that's more of a pigment issue than a brand issue. If you're buying phthalo blue from anybody, it's going to be a staining color. And I think the ultramarine stains a little bit more than the cerulean does here. It's a little bit hard to tell which is which because I've mixed them. But I am able to get some really nice textured clouds. I don't actually want my sky to go back to pure white anyhow, because then I would not get the shadowy shapes of the clouds here. I do also want to place a big tree. So I'm going to swipe straight through there for my tree. Lots of little birch trees in the yard. And we have some tall skinny aspens. I'm working with the lemon yellow and the yellow green right now. Because my paper is dry, I know a lot of times people paint a first layer as all wet and wet. But when you start with dry paper, you have a little bit more control, and I usually gradually add water till it almost seems like I'm painting wet and wet. And I just painted over that tree that I swiped out again. So we'll be testing the yellow-green staining ability. And that's actually not a bad thing, and I'll tell you why in a second. Pull down some tree trunks here. And my tree trunks aren't green, but the space around them is. So I'm actually painting around a line of tree trunks. And we'll swipe down again for that big tree. And by swiping, instead of leaving, maybe using masking fluid or masking tape, or just leaving a crisp, or just drawing a line that I paint around, this helps my scene actually unify a little bit better. Unless that tree was going to be pure white, I actually want to have a little bit of base color in there, a little hint of color. And this one area where the blue has kind of crept into my tree trunk, that is something that's totally fixable. And because my tree is going to have some stains and marks. I want some shadows in my tree area. Those look a little bit too blue. Shadows are actually just an absence of light. And that means what you end up getting is darker value of the color that's already there. So that, and usually a little bit cooler. And that's kind of one of those loose painter rules that you can help you decide simple ways to paint things. And how dark I make my shadows is also going to tell our viewer, whoever's looking at your painting, how much sunshine there is. When there's a lot of contrast between light and dark, we're going to start to feel like it's a really sunny day. So I'm working with the violet, and that is just called Violet. And you can see how these shadows are now quite dark. And so suddenly that gives us a feeling of some very strong sunlight. Now, a lot of times people who paint landscapes, we get very focused on the details because we can see the object in front of us. We know what it looks like, and we don't want to mess it up. But I like to paint the feeling of seeing a scene instead of just all the details of that scene. That's the goal of a loose painter, is to get emotion down. So somebody can feel like they're looking out the window on a sunny day. And maybe if you're in a corporate office and you're surrounded by city buildings and you grew up on a farm, maybe you'd look at a painting like this and you'd be remembering that time in your life, and it would take you away just for a moment to that place at a time when you need it. And I think that's one of the most wonderful purposes of art. It's that ability to transport you to somewhere else. I'm liking the shadows that I see here. This is very soft and loose, and that's a good thing. I'm debating, out my window right now, I can see this is a beautiful color right here, this peacock green. And if you mix it with the red brown, you get a really great super dark hue. I'm just pointing that out because it's one of the colors that I've enjoyed, and I really probably shouldn't add it into my painting at this stage. But if I add a strong dark over here, well, it might do something interesting. Again, that continuation of shadow. One thing about reviewing colors or paint is that I would be maybe swatching out all the different colors. And again, swatches aren't my jam. I like painting stuff, so that's where we're going with this. The bottom of my big tree might fall right around here. I actually have some green grasses there too, so let's try to put that in using a different color than my other areas of my painting, and that's really dark. So I'm going to adjust and brighten it up a little bit. The yellow-green is kind of a semi-transparent color. It's a little more opaque, so you can see how it kind of floats with a bit of dominance even over a darker value color. And it's good to have a few of those semi-transparent, slightly opaque colors in your palette because you can use them to push back a too dark value in another area. And I often will use my opaques for that, adding them into a dark wash to add a little pop of brighter color. And we're going to add some dark shadow over here. That's probably really too dark and dramatic, but isn't it fun? And we're going to add some of that rich ultramarine and violet mixture back into the shadows over here too. The other role I think an artist can play is that of being doing something that a photo cannot do. We can exaggerate to give a stronger sense of place. So yeah, my scene is coming together. I'm leaving a lot of white space actually down in the lower part of the painting. You can see all the little white holes there. White space is something you do want to be careful with because it can easily take over the painting. I often compare white spaces in a wash, in a painting that is otherwise full of color. They can feel like a missing tooth. It's the first thing you see. And we don't necessarily, that can draw your eye to places in the painting where maybe you didn't want people to look, or maybe you didn't want them to be the focus of the painting. So I try to be careful where I place my white space. In this case, having the white space in the foreground does give me that strong contrast with my shadows, but it might turn out to be something I want to tone back later, so I can wash some color over it later on. I do like the way my clouds have created those little edges that look very cloud-like. And once this has dried, I can paint this dominant tree. And once all the elements of the scene are put together, I'll know better whether or not I need to do some adjusting down in this strong, high contrast area of the painting. Usually I try not to make decisions about details until I've painted at least part of all the elements in the scene and start to see things come together. While we're waiting for this to dry, I'd like to show you some of my other favorite colors from this Shinhan palette. And I think you'll like them as much as I do. So I really don't like to do boring things like make swatches. I want to use color and get to know it in action. So with these Shinhan colors, I've had a lot of fun just playing and toying with color to see what it would do. This is their opera pink, and as you can see, you can't get a lot more neon than that. Then I'm just throwing this on some Hanamulla Cezanne paper. This is the back side of their cold press, so it's a little bit slipperier, which means I should get some interesting watermarks as I start to let the color kind of move. And anyhow, that is just a really vibrant pink. Opera is one of my favorite colors, even though it doesn't have the greatest reputation for light fastness. In my experience using it, I've really never noticed any kind of fading in the years that I've used it. So with watercolor, you always, when you're framing and displaying it, you want to put it under out of direct sunlight. Use UV glass if you're really concerned with color fastness, and enjoy the painting for as long as the color lasts. It's going to be a long time. This is the red violet, which is also a gorgeous color, and you can see they're just wonderful companions for each other. The Shinhan pigments have a nice movement, and they have a rich saturation, so they don't feel like a student grade of pigment, even though they aren't their premium quality line. So it's nice to know that I can use this, recommend this affordable alternative to my watercolor students. That's the Prussian blue, which you can see has almost the same vibrance as a phthalo turquoise. And speaking of the phthalos, I would say the peacock green right here is even closer to phthalo turquoise. Actually, the Prussian blue is very close to, kind of falls in between what I would call a Prussian blue and a phthalo blue. And those colors are going to be staining. There's I don't do a lot of work with red because I would rather take a pink and add yellow to it to make my red. But there's this Crimson Lake, which is a nice rich red. And there's one that's just called Red, which is a little more vibrant, a little less muted. And there's a Bordeaux, which I just thought sounded really rich and gorgeous. And you can see it's like a deep wine color. One of my favorite colors to use here, and you can see it's actually quite diminished in my palette, is this brown red. But I tend to not use it by itself as much. Let me just show it to you. It's really just a very warm brown. But I love mixing it with the peacock green to create a really rich dark. And you can see that's like a really rich, deep olive green. I think we're dry enough so that we can paint our tree. I still don't want to touch this area. You can see how the paper is quite rippled still in the middle. And that generally indicates some moisture that's still lurking in the paper, even though it looks dry on the surface. And if there's hidden moisture in there, you can guarantee that it will bleed when you start to add paint over top of that. We don't want bleeding, because it's just not so pretty. I'm going to mix a neutral. I want kind of a grayish color for my trees. The cool thing about mixing neutrals is that if you're not getting a neutral, just keep mixing because you'll get there. The more you add, the more possibility that you have of creating muddy color, and muddy color will get you to that neutral that you're looking for. So that's a little bit too purple. You can see it's kind of a purpley hue. And when something's too purple, that means you need to add its complement to make it more neutral. So I'm going to add some yellow to it. And there's still some blue in here too. So I'm getting actually a blue-gray, and I think I'm okay with that. Yeah, that's kind of a nice gray right there. So let's throw some color down. And looking at my tree this time of day, shadow's going to be on this side, which we already know from the way the shadows move this way. Just put that nice shadow down. And then I'm actually going to add water and soften that edge. I want to have a really beautifully contoured tree. And it actually has contrast on the side here. The sunlight is hitting it, so the trees behind look really dark. So I'll remember that to go over that when I'm at the stage where I need to add the background stuff behind it. A little more of my neutral gray mixture here, and pull up a little bit along the bottom there as well. And I'm actually going to see if I can add in some additional colors here. That green and gray mixture, I think if I add a little violet to it, it'll make it a little more palatable in the scene. That's a near black, so that'll give me a nice dark value in this area of the painting. And you can see that because the paint is wet on the tree, but nowhere else, that the color bleeds inside of the tree shape and stays, but it's prevented from migrating out. And that's what I want at this stage. It's still kind of dampish in this area, but not so much that my color is going to bleed beyond the boundary of that moist paint. And I'm going to put a dark dot right there just to cover that little bit of color that I had leaking in from the sky. And yeah, I think I'm liking that. All those little marks tell the age of the tree, they give character. And once the tree is drier, we'll actually go back over it and add some dry brush to help define the shape of the tree and those scars even more. So I'll be back within a few hours or maybe tomorrow to add the rest of the details to this scene. Since I'm coming back to this after some time has passed, I need to be careful that when I look out my window, I don't start to change the painting to suit this new time of day. If I'm painting this at 3 o'clock and then I come back at 7 o'clock, I'm going to end up with different light placement, different shadows. So that's why I wanted to get those shadows positioned now, so that the information that I need for the rest of the painting has more to do with the shapes of the objects and so forth, and my light placement has already been established. As I test out these Shinhan paints in the second layer, what I'm going to be looking for is how they layer. Is there good lifting and good staining properties? So I want to balance. I want the paint to stay where it's put if I glaze over it lightly. But I do want it to have a little bit of liftability as well, should I decide I want to move things around or combine layers to build greater depths. Now that the painting is fully dried, I'm happy with the saturation of color that I see on the paper. It's quite consistent with the wet and wet, the wet paint. I haven't lost a lot of intensity. And that's something you really want to watch for when you're testing out a paint is, you know, how does it look after it's dried? Is there a great big contrast between how dark it was wet and how dark it is dry? And fortunately with the Shinhan, I'm not seeing a great loss there in terms of intensity. You can expect some watercolors will lose up to 20% of their intensity, and some artists will deliberately paint darker. Now, I don't do so intentionally, but I think I probably do compensate for that loss of intensity a little bit, just because I've been painting for so many years, I don't even think about it. And I like painting with bright colors anyhow, so it's not really a pressing issue with me. Right now I've just glazed over. I wanted to take some of this white away that was in the foreground, and so I just glazed over with a light wash of this murky green. And it is my original green with the addition of a little bit of the yellow green here. And I'm actually going to flow that green up right up into my white spaces along the tree line here too, but I'm going to do that with clear water so that the green just slowly lightens as it moves up towards the background here. And maybe a little bit more green over here. I think I forgot that spot. Sorry, I keep moving, losing track of my space. And now from here, I want to build up some depths in my tree area. I know that the sun was behind the trees here, casting a shadow this way across the painting. And so I know that the back of my trees is actually going to be brighter than the leaves that are nearer to me. So I want to paint it that way, even though outside of my window, like I said, it looks a little different at this time of day. So I've got my green, my murky green here down in the lower part of my palette. And I'm going to actually cool it off with some of the same blue violets that I used to paint my shadows. So you can see as soon as I add that ultramarine, it becomes quite a bit darker and also cooler in temperature. And color temperature is always relative to the colors beside it. And I'm just wanting to use the edge to the side of my brush to paint some leaf shapes to give my trees some definition here. And you can see the first strokes here are a little bit tentative, and then I started getting a little bit bolder. So now I'm going to go back over those initial strokes and just change them to match. And you'll find as you paint that you'll develop a working method for creating texture in your foliage that hopefully necessitates you not having to paint every leaf. And I'm also going to dot in little bits of that original shadow color, and that's why I never clean my palette. So dotting in a little bit of that shadow color will give me further depths in my trees, leaving a few little spaces for the light value color to poke through. And as I move up here, I'm actually going to go a little lighter yet, I think, and create some depths in that lighter value. So I have this basically 3 different colors of green kind of going on there. And I feel like this addition of this green here and the blue violet blends my trees with my tree trunks just a little bit better. And I have kind of a smoother transition. Over by the tree here, I'm going to be real careful. I want my leaves to read as falling behind my tree, not in front of it. So this is where that tree trunk shape is going to start to pop out. And I'm painting a couple of additional tree trunks as well. I wonder if I should paint some that are really strong in contrast. Usually when I wonder something like that, I have to try it. I don't think that it's ever too... Well, I shouldn't say that. I think that there's always a place and a time for experimentation in your painting method. I wouldn't try a brand new big experiment on a painting you've been, devoting your hours to for a long period of time. But I would certainly pull out a scrap of paper and test out a subject to see if I can expand my technical abilities, my creativity, my personal expression by exploring those what-ifs and seeing what I come up with when I try something new. And Not quite loving that green. I used up the green that I was using on this side, and usually I try to add a little bit of its parent colors. Every time I dip in to take some out, I'm adding something new. But fortunately I know the original color families that I chose, and so I can get fairly close to it. Look at how adding those dark lines just makes those trees look, it makes the light look even stronger, stronger contrasts. Whenever I do something like that, where I bring out something in a stronger and more definite way, it makes me want to do it in other places. Make those bold choices. So often it's the bold choices that make your painting unforgettable. Make it stand out. And if you like a more subtle touch, there's room for you too in the vast diversity of watercolor. Okay, so we have now created a scene with our distant trees, getting some texture there. I could go in and debating whether I should. I could go in and add some spatter to my tree foliage, and I might do that once the trees have dried, just to add even more texture. But we'll see if it really needs it once we've placed some marks to make our tree just stand out a little bit more. We want to have a strong dark, some strong darks on our tree. I'm going to go back to my dioxazine violet and my ultramarine blue, and I know I used that brown red to create my dark that I used here, and I think I did have a little bit of that peacock green. That looks like a really deep indigo kind of blue, royal blue color, which means I probably need more kind of orangey brown colors in there. If it's too blue, then the complement to that would be an orange, or in this case a rusty brown works just as well. And I think I want it to be a little more violet in tone, so we'll add a little more violet into there too. And that's a nice rich dark that I think would look nice anywhere you need a near black. And I'm going to use my Loose Goose Dagger Striper from Cheap Joe's Art Stuff for this part of the painting, because I'm going to want to do some fine lines and some dry brush. And I think I can do both with this really fun brush. So right now I'm just doing some dry brush, just kind of skiffing along the top of the paper, and I'm concentrating my darkest and thickest parts, areas of dry brush, where I already have kind of a dark stain happening on the paper, so that it builds up like the second layer of texture. And that's kind of working. Let's do some more. And dry brush just means you have less pigment on your brush, not very much water, so that what you have, it doesn't last as long, but it just skims the surface of the paper and gives you that texture. So it's working with the texture of the paper to create some really beautiful and dynamic marks. I'm going to make that even darker with my peacock green and brown red combination, and then build up even more inside these small areas. And I like to also create some curved horizontal lines that help suggest the roundness of the tree, and some vertical lines that suggest the texture of the bark moving upward up along the tree. And these tall aspens, they tend to not have any branches down till you get quite high up in the tree. So you're really just looking at this tall trunk speckled with these dark marks. Shading in here, so I'm actually going to go in with my brush can see that beautiful, beautiful line there. And soften and pull some of that color. If your dry brush is just looking too stark, you might need to just do a wash of another glaze of color over top, or even just soften that dry brush with the damp brush. You can just blur it just a little bit and make it look a little bit gentler and more diffused. This brush is so good for branches. So now that I've put that stroke of color, this area on the right side of the tree is damp. And so I'm getting some soft marks, and then on the left side I'm getting crisper marks. And that actually helps enhance that feeling of shadow. And I'm going to bring it out even more by using the same rich blue-violet that I used down here. Carry it up the tree a bit. It's one of those visual cues that helps our viewers connect all the dots in our painting. Even just dabbing this brush up and down can give me some interesting little life marks on my tree. This is just a study. Something like this is fun to sketch in just a short period of time. 2 sessions is all it takes to paint a first layer and second layer. I could decide to go in with some spatter, and I'll just demonstrate that to you since we're here and painting. First thing I'm going to do is, if I'm spattering, I want to mask out the areas that I don't want spatter. So we're going to use this paper towel to kind of help us with that. And just cover up my sky. There we go. Now, paper towel's not the most protective, but for the small amount of spattering I'll be doing, it should work just fine. And then just mixing a little bit of color to spray onto my painting. We'll try this darkish color. Toothbrush gives a nice fine spray. You can tap with a bigger brush if you want a bigger shapes, and your brush will probably need to be moister than that. And you'll get more droplets rather than that fine spray. I should actually mask out my tree shape as well. That's awfully bright. There we go. Make sure if you are spattering that you watch the direction of spatter and clear a larger radius around your desk than you think you're going to need. Some colors and some spattering techniques create quite a bit of overspray. So I'm using the lemon yellow right now and hoping that it has just enough opacity to sit over some of this darker color and create its own identity. So I do have a bit of a line where my spatter didn't, my mask actually blocked my spatter from getting onto this side of the painting. So I'm just going to go over again. And then if I do have a little bit of overspray, I can quickly and carefully blot with a clean paper towel. Maybe a few more larger droplets. And some of those droplets will blend with the drying. On the dry paper, they'll be quite independent. They'll have their own identity, and others will slowly bleed if you have moist areas still on your painting. My experience with using Shinhan Professional watercolor paints has been quite positive. I like the bright saturation of color that I get very easily from my dried paint in my palette. The colors, I do have a fairly broad range of colors. Like I said, I would have liked to see more blues in this 30 color kit. And if I were to purchase Shinhan colors, if I were to order these paints again, I would, however, choose the premium watercolors rather than the professional. The cost of the paints seems to be affordable enough that I can very easily have quite a broad range of colors and still be able to afford the premium paints rather than the professional, where you are getting a few substitutions in terms of color quality. With that said, I'm really not noticing that it's lacking a lot in how it paints on my paper. It is, however, very possible that where the quality difference would become apparent is in how the color lasts over a period of time. And so that's something you would want to research and test in your own studies. To use Shinhan watercolors in your own palette, I would encourage you to do so if you're a student who's wanting an affordable brand and one with a lot of diversity of color and actually beautiful saturation. I have a link to how you can order these Shinhan watercolors in the description below this video. I have one 30-piece set of Shinhan professional watercolors to give away. There's a link in the description below the video that you can use to sign up to win and read the terms and conditions of this giveaway. So I hope you enjoyed this little review / tutorial. My passion really is for teaching watercolor in a way that is empowering and frees you to be your own favorite artist. I focus on a loose and fluid style, and if you found this lesson useful, I can guarantee that you're going to love my online courses at learn.angelafehr.com. I recommend you start with Watercolor Jumpstart. It's a 4-week course that's just aimed at helping you kind of loosen up your approach and paint more freely while focusing on artistic principles that are useful to all artists. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this video channel as I share watercolor content that's going to help you on your watercolor journey and help you be your own favorite artist. I'm Angela Fehr. Thanks for watching.